Hey friends, I'm Jess Connolly. I'm an author, a coach, a Bible teacher, and a local church leader, and I love talking to real people who know what it means to have full lives, but also want to walk in abundance. This podcast is for you. It's not my podcast, it's ours. It's for people who crave lighthearted conversations and deeply spiritual truth. It's for people who are busy, tired, waiting, growing, dreaming, working, or praying about what's next. Wherever you're listening from, if it's quiet, mundane, or busy, I am praying for you, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's go. If you or anyone you've loved has ever battled depression, you know how heavy it can feel. The weight of shame, the temptation to isolate, the lie that you're somehow falling behind because you're struggling. I've felt that way before, but I also know that fighting to feel better is worth it. In this episode, I'm sharing my own depression fight plan, not because I have it all figured out, but because I refuse to let shame or defeat have the final word. Maybe this episode is for you. Maybe it's for a friend. Or maybe it's just a reminder to take care of yourself in Jesus' name. Wherever you are today, I pray this encourages you to keep fighting for wholeness, for joy, for life. Let's get into it. Quick disclaimer. The content of this podcast is for informational and encouragement purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health care, mental advice, or therapy. If you're struggling with depression, anxiety, or any other mental health concern, I would strongly encourage you to seek support from a licensed professional. You're not alone, and help is available. If you're in crisis or you need immediate assistance, will you reach out to a trusted professional, a crisis hotline, or a local support network? We've included some links in the show notes to help you get some support if you need it. So I wanted to start by telling you guys a story. In 2010, I was diagnosed with depression for the first time in my life. And at the time, I guess I would have called it postpartum depression, but it was pretty deep set. Backing up to 2008, I had my second kid in 2008. And just a few short months, maybe 2 or 3 months after I'd had my second baby, I thought that I was struggling with some version of postpartum depression. Now, keep in mind, this is 2008. So, roughly 17 years ago. And we were in a really different place culturally with mental health. And so people were talking about postpartum depression, but especially within Christian community, it felt really shameful to struggle with. And so I thought that I had something akin to postpartum depression. And I decided to go to my doctor and talk to my doctor about what I was feeling. And also I wanted to talk about preventing pregnancy further because I felt like, my body needed a break. I'd had 2 kids in 13 months. My kids were 13 months apart and I was struggling. So obviously I was like, I think I need to kind of figure out some form of birth control in my life, right? And I went to the doctor that day, totally intent on, asking for help. And that is when I actually found out I was pregnant with my third baby, which was a miracle and a huge blessing. In no way, shape, or form do I want to talk about that as if it's a hardship because pregnancy was a miracle and that baby is, my much loved third son. But mentally, I was already not in a great place and already feeling really overwhelmed with the 2 very small kids I had, 13 months old or at this point, probably like 15 months old and, 2 months old. And I found out I was pregnant again. So I would say when I got diagnosed with depression in 2010, I'm not totally sure I ever got better from 2008 to 2009 to 2010. I remember feeling really anxious and really low for the better part of that 2 years. But what happened in 2010 when I finally got diagnosed is I had friends who sat me down and said, hey, you are depressed. This is not just tired. This is not just hormones. Like, this is not who you are. And to be honest, by that point, 2 years later, I was shocked. I was shocked when they sat me down. Like, I thought I was doing great. And it was so loving and so kind that my 2 really close friends, had that conversation with me. And I'll come back to that in a moment. all that being said, that was late 2010. And at the time we were in ministry, we were actually planning to go move to Boston to plant a church in Boston. My diagnosis shifted that plan. We decided to stay put and to just like get some healing for our family and kind of normalize as a family. Nick worked a secular job. We got out of formal ministry for a season. And I had two goals in my life, which was like to take care of my kids and to go to therapy. And I'm so grateful for the healing and the restoration that I saw in that season. And I won't share too much about it only because it was so long ago. But that being said, the part of that story that I wanted to tell you is that at the time I was a mommy blogger, I was on the internet almost daily. Instagram was like brand new, but I was on Twitter and I was a part of a community of women who like we basically blogged every day. And at the time I had like a small following on my blog, you know, a couple hundred or a couple thousand people who would read what I wrote. And I remember being too scared to use the word depression. And so I called what I was struggling with the D word. I've got the D word. The D word is really messing me up this week, which is like one of the silliest things now looking back. And I can actually go back and look at my old blog and see where I referred to it openly on the blog as the D word. I just felt shame around the word depression. And I felt all kinds of things about it. So this past fall, I was sitting in my therapist's office, who I'd been seeing for months, or the same therapist I've seen now for years, but I had been like freshly seeing her, you know, more often for the past couple of months. And she said, "Hey, I want to call this what it is. I believe you have clinical depression." And I wouldn't say I necessarily felt shame about that, but I did notice that over the next few weeks, I had a hard time communicating that to anyone. And I think there were a couple of different reasons. I think number one, because I think that to some degree, most people in my life would have lovingly said like, "Yeah, duh, we know, like, we know you are depressed." I've shared a little bit on past podcasts, but the circumstances of our year had just been so incredibly difficult and ongoing that I think a lot of people might have even just said like, maybe they would have even said like, "I don't know if you're depressed," as much as like, this is just really hard. Like things are really hard. And I'll talk a little bit about the distinction between the two in a second. But I'll also say like, I think maybe a reason why I had a hard time saying it out loud was also because I felt some shock around it. And because through the healing journey that I went on in 2010, 2011, I felt so much authority and victory and healing like in my life over depression. I think I really did believe I'll never feel that way again. And so to like kind of blink my eyes and realize, oh, I have been now feeling that way for months was different. Like it just hit me different. It took the wind out of me a little bit. You know, I also was probably less readily excited to talk about it. Not excited to talk about it, but just because of boundaries and because I'm a person who lives online and leads a local church. And when you start saying things like that, you know, people want to speak into it and mostly because they want to help. But, you know, at the end of the day, with something as precarious and as important as your mental health, you cannot have a lot of people speaking into it. You can have people you trust and you can have wise people speaking into it, but it's hard if everyone is kind of telling you what to do. So all that being said, I'm a couple of months out from that conversation with my therapist where she said, "Hey, let's call this what it is. I think I'm ready to share." I definitely still very much feel in the thick of a fight against depression, but I would like to share now in the midst of it, what I am doing to fight for healing while I'm struggling. I want to just speak to, just for a second, maybe like the definition of depression, of clinical depression. If anybody's like, "Oh, yeah, we've heard you say you're going through a hard time." And if no one's ever explained this to you, clinical depression is a mental health condition characterized by persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, or a lack of interest or pleasure in daily activities. It does affect how a person thinks and feels and behaves. leading to a range of emotional and physical problems. So that being said, this is different than like, oh, you're just going through a really hard time and you need to process that. And for me, if I could share like what felt like the real distinction between like, man, this has just been an incredibly hard season, and my therapist saying, hey, let's call this what it is that I was beginning to describe to her how I struggled with a very intense and newfound lack of motivation. So I would describe to her, I know I need to exercise. I know that's good for me, but it would feel like it would take a miracle for me to like hurdle my body forward to move. And some days I could do it, and some days I felt like I couldn't. Or I would tell her, I'm not really wanting to get dressed. I think I probably saw her a couple of times in a row, like dressed in sweats, and I don't mean cute sweats, like I just was like, I'm not really caring about that. And then I actually shared this a couple of weeks ago on my episode entitled Back in My Body, where I talked about just experiencing embodiment and somatic healing with the Lord. But another big red flag for her was that as a person who really tends to care a lot about health and nutrition, I wasn't paying any attention to what I was putting in my body to like an unhealthy degree, just not nurturing my body the way that I used to. And so all of this, she was like, do you get how this is different? You're not just grieving. You're not just anxious. Like there is like a lack of fight in you that is pretty normal. There's a lack of motivation. And even the things that normally bring you joy are not bringing you joy. And I was like, yes, I do see what you're saying. One thing that I think might just be helpful to talk about that I actually really, no one explained this to me until 2023. So 2 years ago, that I never really totally understood. But this idea that prolonged stress or grief can actually impact the serotonin levels in our brain, contributing to symptoms of depression, anxiety, and overall emotional dysregulation. So I knew that serotonin was a real thing. I knew that like, okay, this is an actual thing in our bodies. And when it's off, sometimes we can experience this like physical clinical depression that maybe might not be about situations in our life. So I understood this of like, okay, when I experienced postpartum depression, that was a disruption in my hormones. It wasn't necessarily that obviously that the baby caused a depression. It was that my hormones were off. And so my serotonin was off and the way that my brain functioned was off. So I had understood that. But what I didn't understand until 2023 is that grief and stress can affect our serotonin. So what starts as situational sadness can actually turn into clinical depression. And when someone unpacked that for me, it actually happened to be a pastor who was like, hey, let me explain to you why this happens. I was like, oh, hold on. Everything makes a little more sense, not only in my life and in my past life, but also in people I love. And so I just want to say that because I also find like a lot of people who aren't in mental health circles or aren't having these conversations maybe don't understand the difference between like clinical depression and just feeling like going through something hard, right? But sometimes going through something hard for a prolonged period of time can change your brain chemistry and the way you're able to even process it. So the hard season can turn into clinical depression. It doesn't have to every time in the name of Jesus. I've been through hard seasons that don't lead to clinical depression. But I do think for me in this season, in this year, that is what happened. So all that being said, I just wanted to share that because that information really helped me. I want to just list really quickly for anyone who might be like, I wonder if I'm depressed, or I wonder if I'm just having a hard season, or I wonder if I'm anxious, etc. Just some common symptoms of depression would be persistent sadness, emptiness, tearfulness, a loss of interest or pleasure in activities once enjoyed, significant weight loss or gain or changes in appetite, insomnia or excessive sleeping, fatigue or loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt, difficulty concentrating, making decisions, or thinking clearly, restlessness or slowed movements and speech, and of course, unfortunately, recurrent thoughts of death or suicidal ideation. So again, all of these things, I hope you listen to the disclaimer at the beginning of the episode. If you're noticing like, man, I've got a couple of these symptoms in my life, I would just massively encourage you to reach out to someone. But that being said, when I noticed some of these symptoms in my life, here's what I ended up doing. So in that moment, when my therapist looked at me and said, hey, what we're dealing with now, I believe is clinical depression and we need a plan. That's almost exactly what she said to me. And she was like, we need to fight. And I don't know that all therapists are as tough in a moment like that, but mine knew that that's what I needed. I think she knew I needed like a wake up call to say, this is not just you're sad. This is not just you're tired. This is not just you're anxious. We're dealing with something else now. So she said, like, right now, you and I, we're making the plan. And that's really what this episode is about. The thing I want to say right now is what I have noticed in both seasons for me of struggling with depression is that the things I know will help me feel better are the things I least want to do. That's just how it is. The things that I know that will help me feel better are the things that I least want to do. And again, understanding like there is a clinical scientific reason for that because your brain chemistry has shifted and has changed. But for me, when she said like, hey, we're going to make a plan right now and non-negotiables of the things that you're going to try to do every day, it also called me up to remind me that like I have autonomy and authority over my body. And so I can say, I do not feel like getting dressed right now. And I know that that's what's good for me. And so I am going to do it. I can actually make my body do that. I can actually, even though I can acknowledge like, I do not want to do this. I don't have the motivation to do this. I feel like doing this. Something in me feels like it is unsafe. It is unsafe to get up. I should just stay exactly where I'm at. I should not move, that I do still have the authority as someone who has free will and can make decisions and can move my body to do those things for myself. And so my list that we came up with in the exact moment were these 4 things: that I would get dressed every day, I would say, parentheses, what I later realized about a week later is like, it needed to be a semi-cute outfit. You've never seen me trying so hard at fashion as I have in the last 2 months. And it's not because I'm trying to pretend that I'm okay. And it's not because I'm trying to like delight in my clothing. It's because I am fighting for like every ounce of color and awakeness and aliveness and creativity that I can muster. And this is something I can control. I can go to my closet and say like, what feels fun? Maybe I don't feel fun. Maybe I don't feel joyful, but I'm going to use my authority and autonomy to like put some clothes on. And it also signals to my body and my brain, like, you matter, you're alive, you're awake, you're worthy of breath and movement and nutrition and all the things. Like, you matter. We're going to put clothes on you. My number 1 is that I get dressed every single day. And I would say, comma, I've been trying to get dressed cute every single day. Even when I go to the gym, I'm trying to make it cute. You know what I'm saying? I don't feel like it. I don't feel cute. I sometimes feel like I'm just, just floating, but I get dressed every day. The second thing, because this was a major red flag for me and for my therapist, is that I am pretty intentional about nutrition and what I put in my body. So I was diagnosed as pre-diabetic several years ago, maybe 2021, almost 4 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. So I'm known for a long time that sugar has a really interesting effect on me. If I could tell you of all the things that I put in my body that make me feel more depressed, sugar is the top. I cannot describe it to you, but if I have a bowl of ice cream an hour later, I'm going to crash. My body is going to like not be able to process that correctly in a way that is going to have a very emotional effect on me. But also, I noticed that specifically in the late fall, my listlessness, my depression was also causing me to just not really care about what I put in my body nutrition wise. So it wasn't even that I was like eating poorly. I just wasn't thinking about eating. And so I'm trying to pre-plan and be thoughtful about the nutrition and what I put in my body. So number 1, I get dressed every day. Number 2, I eat every day, which sounds really simple, but I'm trying to think like, what is the most nourishing, nutritious, delicious thing I can put in my body? If you've listened to the podcast for any amount of time, you might know I don't cook. I never cook. I'm not great at cooking. Nick is a fantastic chef and he prefers cooking. So he does all the cooking for our family. I am so sorry if that makes you jealous. I know that I'm blessed and highly favored in this way. But I will tell you, in the last few weeks and months, I've tried to cook once a week, even just to like care so much about my nutrition that I would say like, hey, let me get back in the kitchen and try. I made homemade pizzas last night. To be honest with you, I've made homemade pizzas like 3 weeks in a row. That's been the only meal I've made because I'm really trying to get better at my homemade pizza sitch. So last night was my best so far and I'm really grateful. So number 1, I get dressed every day. Number 2, I eat nutritious food every day. Number 3, I move my body every day. At my best, at my healthiest, I am doing like spicy, fun, creative workouts. I am writing my own workout plans. I am coming up with cool things to do in the gym because that's really fun for me. But what I have learned in the last 2 or 3 months is that just moving my body is totally enough in this season. Yesterday, I don't think there are any men listening to this episode, but if you are, I'm about to say something about women's reproductive health. And, if you want to stop listening, you can. But yesterday was the first day of my cycle, of my monthly cycle. And I had literally no motivation to move my body in any way, shape, or form, not only because of the state of my mental health, but also just like how I was feeling physically. So I literally went to ChatGPT and I said, ChatGPT, I'm on the first day of my period. I do not feel like going to the gym at all. I need to move my body. What can I do? I said, write me a workout for today that is effective and also not high energy. And it did. And I was so grateful. Sometimes I just go on a walk. Sometimes I just stretch at my house, but I'm trying to move my body every single day. And really the main reason I'm doing this is for endorphins because my body needs every fighting chance right now. And endorphins, the hormones that come when you exercise, are incredible for your mental health. And so I'm doing that for my body, is that I'm moving every single day. And then lastly, on my fight list is I'm reading the word. I'm getting in God's word. And I want to just pause here to talk about like the different ways different people fight depression and maybe why I think Christians are so tentative to talk about it. I think that for sure, there are whole camps of believers that would say, like, if you're struggling with something like depression or anxiety, you should only fight it spiritually. And I'll just share from my perspective. You don't need to email me if you don't agree. That's totally fine. Jesus could blink his eyes and we'd all agree, and we don't. So I believe that maybe we all have varied perspectives on this for our reasons. So I'm not telling you my perspective is right. I'm telling you it's my perspective. I believe we live under the effects of a fallen world. And I believe because of that, we have been given the discernment and the wisdom to make decisions about medicines that might help us. I believe that everything is spiritual. I believe that everything deserves a spiritual response. I just also believe that sometimes our spiritual response is a physical response. I don't believe that we're souls that have a body. I believe that it's all one. We are body and soul. And if you don't know why I believe that, I would say go back to the Back in My Body episode where we talk about the theology of the body and how Jesus's embodiment is so incredibly essential to understanding our faith in the gospel. And so all that being said, I do believe that depression is spiritual, but I also believe that it's physical. I don't believe that you can even separate the two. So that being said, I am fighting spiritually in a variety of different ways. And I would say, to me, moving my body is also fighting spiritually. I would say getting dressed is fighting spiritually. I would say nourishing myself is fighting spiritually. I am kicking the enemy of my soul in his teeth every single day when I say my life is worthy of intention and care and nourishment, and the belief that I will continue to take care of myself so that I will feel better one day, because I will feel better one day. Like, this is going to lift. But of course, I'm going to be fighting spiritually. Of course, I'm going to be reciting scripture over myself. Of course, I'm going to be praying and asking God for relief. And of course, I'm going to be asking other people to pray and believe with and for me. All that being said, when I say that I read the word every day, it is to fight spiritually. But I also want to tell you, for me, the reason why it feels so essential every day is because I am fighting the defeat that says it's always going to be this way, or the defeat that says like God is not thinking of me, or he is not good, or he is not faithful. And so to get in his word where I can read about his character every day and call up my mind and have my mind renewed by the power of his word to remember he is good, he's kind, he's a good father, he is loving, he's a redeemer, he's a restorer. And that like as one of his kids, I get to remember what he's done for me in the past, and I get to claim and proclaim and speak prophetically about what he's going to do for me in the future. It just helps me. And so number one, I get dressed every day. Number two, I eat nourishing meals every day. Number three, I move my body. And number four, I spend time in the word. Those four things are my fight plan. I want to be honest and say, I don't get to do all of them every single day. I have days that I don't move, or have days that I don't spend time in the word, but that doesn't mean that the next day I don't try again to do all four. I want to give like a very quick caveat right here about medication, because again, I've obviously already shared about it. Again, to me, I think this is an issue of discernment that like every person has to decide, is medication right for me? I have no qualms whatsoever with taking medication to fight a bodily issue, especially when I'm also fighting spiritually. I did take medication in 2011 to fight depression, and I do believe it really served me. And I was able to come off of it when I felt better. I had like no marked side effects that I would notice, etc. I did feel shameful about it back then, and I didn't want to tell people for a really long time. I'm not currently like starting a new medication to fight clinical depression, but I am not against it. So if I get to a point where I feel like that is what I need, that is what I would do. I just don't have like a sense of discernment that right now is the time for that. And right now, really the reason why is because I'm seeing that when I like get up and I fight and I take care of my body, I'm able to do those things without the aid of medication right now. I'm able to do those things and I experience the hope and the healing, even just like the light cracking a little bit more each and every day. But if I felt like I needed to, if my doctor, my therapist, wise counsel in my life felt like I needed to, from my perspective, I would feel literally no conviction about that. So I would just say, if that's not your perspective, I literally bless you. I will not send you an email. I will not come to your Instagram and tell you you're wrong. And it would just bless me if you would not do the same for me. For whatever reason, the Lord has allowed us to have different discernment on this. And I'm not telling anyone that my perspective is right. It's just my perspective. So I just wanted to share that little caveat. That's the only reason why you don't hear that listed in my current fight plan. And that's because I just don't perceive that that is right for me right now in this season. I want to tell you that the fifth thing that I didn't name with my therapist that day, but that has served me a ton, that also became a one-time part of my depression fight plan. And that is this. I told the people who needed to know. And by that, I mean, I immediately told my husband. I told a couple members of my team. And then just most recently, I told my grow group. So I told the women who I do basically like mutual discipleship with. And I'm going to tell you what I did with my grow group, which I have done with a couple of different groups of friends. Actually, I had a friend who was struggling with depression a couple of years ago, and she made up this system. She said, hey, sometimes when I'm really struggling, it's too hard for me to like call you or text you and say, like, here's how I'm feeling. And so she said, I am going to just send you a particular emoji and I'm going to tell you which one it is. That's when you're going to know, like, we're at SOS. I was like, okay, I love this plan. And so I actually did that with my grow group a little bit ago. I said, listen, this is my SOS emoji. If I send it to you, like, I really need prayer. I just may need you to even check in on me. And I will tell you, since I've shared it, I have used the emoji with them. And that has been really helpful. And I'll tell you, they said, like, thank you. We felt so loved that you told us that. And I just want to pause here and like speak to people who might say, like, I don't have those people. Or if I told people like that I was really struggling, they might not respond well. And I also just want to say that has happened to me as well. I've definitely been in seasons where I've told people thinking like, okay, they're going to be on my team, and they have not either had the capacity to do that, or they don't know what it means, or they've done it in a way that's unhelpful to me. Nothing's harder than when you're already in the thick of it and you feel like you need help and you feel like you need support and you don't get what you need. And so I don't have like quick fix answers for this, except for to say, if you have one safe person, if you have two safe people, and if you don't, again, please see the link that we've shared about maybe getting you some resources that you need. Hey, to finish this off, I want to just share a couple of different things that I think might be helpful on your fight plan. If you are a person who needs one, or if you're walking with someone who might need a fight plan, but this is still not an exhaustive list. So therapy, obviously, journaling, sunlight, sleep, limiting caffeine and alcohol. I would advocate for watching what you're listening to and watching what you're watching, paying attention to how it's affecting your mental health, limiting social media. Vagal nerve stimulation. We can do a whole podcast episode on vagal nerve stimulation. I will also say that is also a part of my fight plan, but I'm not doing it every single day. And again, we could do a whole podcast episode on it, but you can Google it. But I'm also trying to support my body in that way. Paying attention to diet, what you eat, what foods make you feel certain ways. And then lastly, even using the therapy tool of EMDR, which I've also shared about on previous podcasts, because that's a tool that I've used in the past. So I just want to advocate for all of those things. And then lastly, I just wanted to end by reading Isaiah 61. For me, the first time I struggled with depression, I found myself moving towards this passage every single day. And I've recently just been reminded of how much it encourages me. And honestly, it's a prophetic word in the book of Isaiah about Jesus and about what he does for people. But in the midst of this prophetic word about Jesus, the subject turns and he begins to talk about like what will happen for those that follow him. And so I just pray it's encouraging and it feels like a beacon of hope to you. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities. They have been devastated for generations. Strangers will shepherd your flocks. Foreigners will work your fields and vineyards, and you will be called priests of the Lord, and you will be named ministers of our God. Instead of your shame, you will receive a double portion, and instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. And so you will inherit a double portion in your land, and everlasting joy will be yours. Father, I just pray for any of my friends who are struggling, who are fighting. And I pray for any of my friends who know somebody who's struggling and fighting with depression. God, I thank you that you are a redeemer, a restorer, and a lifter of heads. I thank you that you love your kids, that you have compassion and gentleness and mercy coming toward us. And we ask in the name of Jesus that you would give us insight about how to fight, that you would give us the courage to keep fighting, and that you would help us to just keep pressing into the wholeness and abundance and healing that you've purchased for us on the cross. Let's go. Friends, I'm so grateful you listened to today's episode. Thanks for spending time with me. It would mean the world to me to connect with you. So you can send me a DM on Instagram at Jess A. Connolly or head to my website, jessconnolly.com for more ways to connect. If you have a minute to subscribe and leave a review of the podcast wherever you listen, it would massively help us reach more people with the good news that they can live fully awake. Let's go.